Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
Thanksgiving in our family has always looked picture perfect from the outside. The long oak table dressed in cinnamon-colored linen, the gold-trimmed plates, the butter-soft dinner rolls in a wicker basket passed down 3 generations. You'd think we were one of those postcard families where everything was warm, golden, and full of polite laughter. And we were, for exactly 10 minutes. That's how long it took before the first passive-aggressive comment flew across the table like a gravy boat on ice. But this year would be different. This year was a performance. Only I knew the final act had already been written. I walked in that afternoon holding a bottle of Pinot Noir I had no intention of drinking. My sister Rachel was already in the kitchen, talking too loud, laughing too sharp, flipping her hair the way she always does when she wants attention. She greeted me with a tight hug and a fake smile that didn't touch her eyes. Her husband, Tom, was in the living room watching the game with a beer that looked like it had been glued to his hand since last Thanksgiving. My mom, Diane, was fluttering around nervously, stirring things that didn't need stirring and asking if everyone was comfortable even when nobody answered. You can tell a lot about people from where they choose to sit. Rachel, of course, took the head of the table as if she'd earned it, even though the house still technically belongs to Mom. I was placed halfway down, close enough to be in the splash zone, far enough not to matter. My daughter Beth, 17 and sharper than most adults, sat across from me with her earbuds still in and a look that said, "Get me out of here." Dinner started normal enough. The turkey was dry, the conversation drier. Uncle Roy cracked his usual inappropriate joke, something about stuffing that didn't belong in a bird, and everyone fake laughed except for Diane, who turned red and pretended she didn't hear. Rachel leaned into her usual role, center of attention, queen of the roast, master of the backhanded compliment. She smiled at Beth and said, "You're so grown up now, almost pretty, like I used to be." Beth gave her a look that could have cracked porcelain. It was about halfway through the second round of mashed potatoes when it happened. Rachel had been drinking not enough to stumble, but just enough to forget she wasn't the only one in the room. She reached across the table with her wine glass, gesturing wildly during one of her dramatic stories about her yoga instructor getting arrested. I kid you not, and before I could say a word, the entire glass tipped forward. A thick stream of deep red arced across the table like blood in a B-movie. And landed right on my laptop. I watched it happen in slow motion. The splash, the hiss, the red crawling into the keys like it was trying to live there. The room went still. Forks paused midair. Diane gasped like someone had been shot. Tom muttered shit under his breath and then looked away. Rachel blinked, then smirked, then tilted her head in that way that makes her look both smug and 12 years old. "Oh my God, it's just stuff," she said, laughing like this was cute. "Relax, Eric. Don't be such a drama queen. It's not like you don't have backups." That was the moment. Not the wine, not the laugh, not even the ruined device. The moment was that shrug, that arrogant flick of dismissal like everything I had built, written, stored, and planned didn't mean a thing because it didn't mean a thing to her. She turned back to her story like she hadn't just nuked my hard drive in front of the whole damn family. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't curse. I just looked her dead in the eye and said, "You're right, Rachel. It's just stuff." And I smiled. A long, quiet smile that made Uncle Roy stop chewing. That made my daughter pull her earbuds out. That made my mom glance between us like a squirrel caught in traffic. But I knew what Rachel didn't. Because a week earlier, I backed up that laptop. Not because I thought something might happen to it. Because I knew someone might try to make something happen. Not everyone plays chess, but I do. And she'd just moved her queen too early. The air around the table changed after that. People went back to chewing, but slower. Nobody laughed quite as hard. Even the football game on the TV in the background sounded more like a warning than a celebration. Rachel didn't notice. She never does when she's winning. Have you ever let someone cross a line too many times just to see how far they'd go? What would you do if that accident felt a little too intentional? Tell me in the comments, I'd really like to know. When dessert came out, pumpkin pie, whipped cream, the works, I excused myself from the table. Not because I was upset, because I had something to do. I walked upstairs, opened my phone, and logged into the backup drive. The one labeled Family Insurance. I scrolled through the folder's names, dates, screenshots, recordings. And then I saw it. The one file I had promised myself I would never open. Not unless she pushed me. Not unless she made me. And wouldn't you know it? Red wine makes a hell of a push. It started with the kind of feeling you can't name, but can't ignore either. That creeping, buzzing thing in your chest that tells you something's off, even though everyone's pretending everything is fine. A few months before Thanksgiving, I found myself watching Rachel more closely, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't not. There was something about the way she held her phone a little too tight, how her smile stretched wider when someone asked what she'd been up to, how she'd cut off conversations mid-sentence when certain names were mentioned. It wasn't one big red flag, it was 100 little beige ones. At the 4th of July barbecue at my mom's house, I saw her step away from the group to take a call. She was near the old swing set, the one our dad built when we were kids, and I could see her body language from the patio tense, sharp, like she was trying to keep her voice from rising. She kept glancing back toward us like she was afraid someone might be watching, and sure enough, someone was. I didn't hear the conversation, but I saw her hang up, exhale through her nose like a bull trying to calm down, and then stuff her phone deep into her back pocket. That would have been enough to raise my suspicions, but then she did something strange. She reached into her purse, pulled out a small black flash drive, and set it on the edge of the picnic table, right next to a plate of baked beans. Now, I don't know if she was distracted or just careless, but she left it there when she went back inside, and I waited. I watched her vanish into the kitchen where she was already mid-lie about how she needed to check the pie like Rachel ever baked anything in her life. And when the coast was clear, I walked over, picked up the flash drive, and pocketed it without a word. I didn't look at it that night. I told myself it was none of my business, that I was being paranoid, maybe even cruel, but the drive kept staring at me from my desk like it had a heartbeat of its own. 3 days later, I plugged it into my old desktop, the one I don't use much, but keep for exactly this kind of thing, and copied every file onto a hidden folder labeled Receipts. Then I pulled the drive out and slipped it back into her purse the next time we met for coffee, making sure she never noticed. If she did, she never let on. The files were a mess at first, folders within folders, with names like archive and photos_2 and invoices like someone who wasn't tech-savvy had tried to organize them, but gave up halfway through. I didn't open anything, not yet. I just saw that it was a lot. Dozens of images, voice recordings, screenshots, PDFs, enough that you could spend hours going through it and still not reach the bottom. That was when I knew it wasn't just curiosity anymore. This was a puzzle, and Rachel had just handed me the first piece. Around that time, Rachel's behavior got even stranger. She started reaching out to me more often, which was unusual in itself, always with some flimsy excuse, asking about Mom's medication schedule, wondering if Beth needed help with college stuff, offering to lend me a slow cooker I never asked for. At one point, she even suggested we do sibling brunch, which sounded about as natural as her fake blonde hair. I played along. I smiled. I nodded. But I watched her the way a hunter watches the wind. At one brunch, she let it slip, just for a moment, that she had been through some things lately and was finally happy again. I asked what she meant, and she waved it off with a smile that didn't match her eyes. "Oh, you know how life gets," she said, which told me absolutely nothing and everything at the same time. From there, it became a game. She thought she was playing it. She had no idea I was 2 moves ahead. I started watching her social media posts, tracking the times she was online, comparing them to the late-night messages I could see in a backup sync from one of her old Facebook chats, the one she'd forgotten to log out of when she borrowed my laptop 2 years ago. She must have thought I'd wiped the data, but I hadn't. I never do. Some of the names that kept popping up didn't make sense. One in particular, a man named Marcus, who I vaguely remembered as someone who used to date Mom years ago, before her last boyfriend passed. He'd been around a few Thanksgivings ago, sitting quietly in the corner, always polite, always watching. I hadn't seen him in a while. Now his name was all over her messages. It made my stomach twist, but I still didn't open the files. I wanted to wait. Not because I was afraid, but because I needed to be sure that when the time came, I'd know exactly what I was looking at. The months crept by. Summer turned into fall. The leaves in our town gave up and tumbled to the ground like old promises, and still I waited. Rachel kept spinning her little world of charm and chaos, unaware that every step she took left a trail I was following. The flash drive remained untouched, the files unopened for now. I'd backed them up twice, once locally and once to a secure cloud account under a dummy name. I knew better than to confront her without proof. And besides, I wasn't looking for an argument. I was looking for a moment. A moment when all the secrets she thought she buried would come clawing up through the floorboards, asking to be seen. A moment like Thanksgiving. A moment when no one could walk away. When the table was full, and the wine was flowing, and the eyes were all on her. Because some things don't just go away. Some truths are patient. They wait in silence, buried in folders, tucked between lies and lasagna, and they whisper when the house is loudest. I wasn't sure what I'd find in that flash drive, but I knew it would matter. And I knew, the moment she spilled that wine, it would all finally come pouring out. There's a kind of calm that comes right before the storm, but it isn't peace. It's more like the world holding its breath, waiting to see who's going to flinch first. That's where I found myself during the fall leading up to Thanksgiving, caught in the slow grind of pretending everything was fine, while knowing in my bones that something was coming. I wasn't just suspicious of Rachel anymore. I was certain she was hiding something big, and I'd be damned if I let her burn me again without leaving scorch marks of her own behind. So I stopped playing the fool and started laying my groundwork like someone getting ready for war, not because I wanted one, but because I knew she'd already fired the first shot. I started with the basics, wiping and re-encrypting every drive I owned, installing fresh security software with layers deeper than anything she'd guess I knew how to use. Rachel always saw me as the harmless brother, the quiet one, the guy who fixed printers and never raised his voice at family dinners. She never once thought I might be watching. But I was watching now. Watching everything. The moment I copied the flash drive she'd left behind, I stopped being a passive observer. I created a secure folder on my main laptop, buried 3 levels deep under a dummy photo album labeled Beth's Graduation, something no one in their right mind would dare snoop through. Inside that folder, I placed the copied contents of the drive along with the beginning of a private log, time-stamped notes, screen grabs, transcriptions of any weird messages she posted online, phone call times when I knew she was lying about where she was. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. Because when someone laughs in your face after destroying something important to you and expects you to just smile and move on, that's not a sibling, that's an adversary in pearls. And Rachel had made it perfectly clear that she didn't respect boundaries, didn't respect people, only appearances. That's what this was always about for her, how things looked. How they played out in front of Mom. How she could twist anything into a joke so people would laugh instead of dig deeper. And just like always, Mom, Diane, begged me not to start something. She said Rachel was going through a hard time and that family should support each other, not spy on each other. But what she really meant was, don't make me choose. Don't make me see Rachel for who she really is. And I didn't blame her for that. Diane had spent her whole life smoothing things over, gluing cracks in the family foundation with denial and sweet tea. But this wasn't about old arguments anymore. This was about truth. Cold, uncomfortable, possibly destructive truth. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Not even Beth, though I'm pretty sure she knew something was up. She's always been smart like that, observant, like me, but sharper in her own way. She'd look up from her phone during dinner and ask questions like, "Why does Aunt Rachel only call when she wants something?" I'd just shrug and say, because that's who she is, but inside I was proud she saw through it. Kids know more than we give them credit for, especially when they've grown up around lies wrapped in smiles. So while Rachel pranced through the fall like nothing was wrong, hosting wine nights with her friends, tagging herself at restaurants with captions like, "Finally happy again," and making those little jabs at me any chance she got, I was quietly collecting receipts. Not just the digital kind. I started recording voice memos after our calls, documenting every time she contradicted herself. I even managed to pull old security cam footage from Mom's front door camera where Rachel arrived late one night, clearly drunk, banging on the door until Diane let her in. She claimed it was a quiet night catching up with friends. The footage said otherwise. I made copies of everything, not just backups, but backups of the backups. One on an encrypted external drive that I kept hidden in a fireproof lockbox in my closet. Another uploaded to a cloud service under an alias only I knew. It wasn't that I expected a laptop crash. It was that I expected her. I knew her well enough by then to know she'd go too far. I just didn't know when. But when she did, I'd be ready. Still, every time I saw her, she acted like none of it mattered. Like our shared history wasn't filled with her stepping over me just to stand taller. I'd walk into a room, and she'd roll her eyes like I'd ruined the party by showing up. She'd make digs in front of people, calling me Captain Conspiracy or Mr. Backup Everything like it was a punchline, not a warning. What she didn't know, what she never understood, was that people like me don't need the spotlight. We just need the truth. And we keep it stored, safely, quietly, waiting for the right moment. The day before Thanksgiving, I updated everything, triple-checked the folders, ran final integrity scans, made sure all copies were intact. I labeled the final file with a name she'd never think twice about, Holiday Recipes, Doc. But inside that doc? A full index of everything I had. Every conversation. Every date. Every file. The truth, buried in plain sight, just waiting to be revealed. Rachel didn't know it, but she'd been living on borrowed time. And I wasn't angry, not really. I was focused. There's a difference between holding a grudge and holding a mirror. And I was getting ready to hold that mirror up to her face in front of the entire family. Because sometimes people need to see themselves the way others do, not through the filter of charm and timing, but through the brutal lens of consequence. And when the glass finally broke, I wasn't planning to raise my voice. I wasn't going to scream. I was just going to press play and let her lies speak for themselves. There's a particular kind of energy that hangs in the air when everyone in the room is pretending to like each other, like a house straining at the seams just before it splits in two. That Thanksgiving evening was thick with it, not tension exactly, not yet, but the kind of artificial cheer that comes when people know something's wrong but don't want to be the one to say it out loud. The food smelled like tradition, turkey, cranberry sauce, and overcooked green beans, but beneath the surface was something darker, something simmering just below the gravy boats and forced laughter. The living room had been filled with the low hum of a football game, but no one was really watching. It was background noise, a convenient place to stare when the conversation dipped or when someone said something they shouldn't have. I stood near the edge of the dining room, watching my family swirl around each other like dancers in a broken routine. Rachel, as always, was in the center, her smile a little too wide, her glass never more than half full. She was buzzing, not just from the wine, but from the attention, from being the star of the show again, the golden child with the loud laugh and the convenient memory. She caught my eye across the room and held it, just for a second, long enough to let me know she hadn't forgotten what happened between us, long enough to remind me that in her mind, she'd already won. There was something in the way she raised her eyebrows at me, like she was daring me to say something, daring me to make a scene. And I just smiled, slow and still, the kind of smile that doesn't come from joy but from patience, from knowing something the other person doesn't. Mom was in the kitchen, muttering to herself about the rolls being too brown while ignoring the fact that half the family hadn't spoken directly to each other since last Christmas. Tom sat slumped at the far end of the table, poking at the stuffing like it had personally offended him. Beth leaned on her elbow with her chin in her hand, scrolling something on her phone with the kind of disengaged expression that only teenagers can truly master. And Uncle Roy, bless him, had already had too much bourbon and was starting to wax philosophical in the way only drunk uncles can. "You know," he said, waving his fork like a preacher with a sermon, "the thing about families is, secrets don't stay buried. They bubble up like stew on the stove, just waiting for someone dumb enough to take the lid off." The room laughed, politely, but it hit me like a slap. I glanced at Rachel. She was pretending not to hear him, suddenly fascinated by the butter dish. But I saw her flinch, just a little, just enough. Dinner was served, dishes passed hand to hand like offerings to some passive-aggressive deity. Conversation bounced around from politics to weather to how expensive groceries had gotten, the usual safe ground. And through it all, Rachel kept looking at me. Not openly, but through the side of her glass, around the corners of her words. Like she was waiting. Like she knew something was coming and was trying to guess when. Wine flowed freely, of course. Rachel had picked a vintage that no one could pronounce, but everyone pretended to enjoy. She offered me a glass with that same mocking smile, the kind that said, "We both know you don't drink, but I'm going to offer anyway, just to prove I'm nicer than you." I declined with a nod, watching her pour her own glass a little too full, the deep red liquid swirling like velvet in her hand. It was during dessert that it happened, right after the pies were set out, right after the toasts that no one asked for, right after Uncle Roy started in on another half-coherent story about a woman he once dated who turned out to be married to her cousin. Rachel reached across the table for a second helping of whipped cream, wine glass still in her hand, gesturing wildly as she laughed at her own joke about Beth's goth face, which Beth absolutely did not find funny. And then it spilled. Time slowed. The glass tilted. The red poured out like blood from a wound, arcing across the tablecloth, staining the white linen with a bloom of crimson that spread like fire. And it hit. My laptop. Closed, sitting off to the side like it always was at family dinners, not because I needed it, but because I liked having it near, because it felt like armor. The wine hit the top and slid down the edge, pulling into the keyboard like it belonged there. The sound was soft, a little hiss, like breath through teeth. And Rachel froze. Her smile faltered for just a second, and then she recovered, faster than anyone should be able to. She set the empty glass down, made a face like she dropped a napkin instead of ruining a machine, and said, "Oops." She laughed. "It's just stuff, Eric. Come on. You really shouldn't bring your work to the table anyway. What, were you writing the next great American novel or something?" Everyone chuckled nervously, waiting to see what I would do. I looked at her. Really looked at her. And I felt nothing. No rage. No heat. Just confirmation. She hadn't changed. She never would. She thought she'd done something clever, something dismissible, something she could grin her way out of. But what she didn't know was that the laptop wasn't the only place the files lived. Not the only home for the truth I'd been gathering piece by piece for months. It wasn't just stuff. It was a test. And she'd failed. So I stood slowly, picked up the dripping machine, and set it down gently on a side table. I looked around the room, at Mom, already panicking behind her eyes, but trying to smile through it, at Tom, who couldn't meet my gaze, at Beth, who nodded once like she understood more than she should have. And then I looked back at Rachel and said, "You're right. It's just stuff." Then I turned and walked out of the room, calm and unshaken, pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the folder labeled Holiday Recipes. I scrolled down to the bottom, tapped once, and watched as the files began syncing to a shared link. Rachel had played her hand. Now it was my turn. The quiet upstairs was almost sacred compared to the chaotic hum still echoing downstairs, where laughter had dulled and the air was thick with the smell of cranberry sauce and spilled wine. I closed the door to my old childhood bedroom with a soft push, not because I was trying to hide, but because what I was about to open deserved silence. Not just silence, but clarity. That moment of breath before everything changes, the moment when you stand at the edge of something and know, without any doubt, that once you cross the line, there's no way back. The laptop was a casualty now, its soaked shell sitting downstairs like a gutted soldier, but the truth had never lived there exclusively. My phone vibrated in my palm as I opened the secure folder, one I'd tested and retested for weeks, encrypted with a passphrase I'd never spoken aloud. I tapped through layers of security, bypassing screens that would look like broken apps to anyone else, until I reached the heart of it. A folder named simply Rachel_archive, a bland name for something so corrosive. Inside were subfolders organized by dates and tags, messages, audio, photos, transfers, and one ominously titled Family. I hovered over that one for a moment, my thumb poised just above it, heart pounding in that strange, heavy way it does when your body already knows what your mind doesn't want to believe. I could still back out. I could delete it all and play dumb and let her win again. But I didn't come this far to blink. The first file I opened was a screenshot of an email chain between Rachel and a contact named Marcus W. The name hit me in the gut like a punch. Marcus Winston had been around our family for years, a soft-spoken, respectful man who started dating Mom after Dad passed. He'd been kind to me, more like a friend than a stepfather figure, and he had this way of listening that made you feel like you were being seen, really seen. And now, 2 years after his sudden passing, heart attack, they said here he was, appearing in messages that had nothing to do with Diane and everything to do with Rachel. I scrolled through threads that were flirtatious at first, full of innuendos and vague promises, and then turned explicit, undeniable. The timestamps matched dates when Rachel had told Mom she was taking time to focus on herself or going to a retreat. There were receipts, hotel bookings, meal charges, even a selfie that made my stomach turn. She was in a mirror, her hand holding the phone, her other hand tangled in his shirt. Marcus, blurred but unmistakable, standing behind her. The caption read, "Can't wait to sneak you in again." My jaw clenched hard enough I could hear my teeth grind. This wasn't just betrayal. This was desecration. Rachel had seduced the man who loved our mother, who sat at our dinner table and helped her through grief, and turned that into some sick private adventure. And then, after he died, she never said a word. Never cried harder than necessary. Never hinted that she'd lost more than an acquaintance. She let Diane mourn alone, clueless and heartbroken, while she moved on like nothing had ever happened. I opened the voice notes next, not because I wanted to hear her voice, but because I had to. I had to know how far this went. The first one was just static, background noise, and muffled sounds of traffic. But the second, that one was clear as day. Rachel's voice, speaking softly, urgently. "You can't tell her. You cannot tell my mother. Do you hear me? It'll kill her, and I'm not joking. She's fragile now. Just let it die with him." There it was. Proof. Intent. Cowardice. She hadn't just made a mistake, she'd made a choice. A long-term, deliberate decision to bury the truth along with the man. And what twisted the knife deeper was that she'd used her own daughter to keep the secret. Another folder contained text messages between Rachel and her teenage daughter, Harper. In one, Harper asked, "Do I have to lie again this weekend?" To which Rachel replied, "Just say we were together. It's not a big deal. No one will check." Reading that, something inside me cracked in a way that I wasn't sure would ever fully heal. Rachel had always been manipulative, a liar, a deflector, a gaslighter, but this wasn't petty drama or sibling rivalry anymore. This was real damage. To Mom. To Harper. To Marcus, even. And to all of us, because lies like that don't stay contained. They spread like mold, slow and silent, until everything starts to rot. I closed the files, not because I was done, but because I couldn't look anymore. Not yet. I needed air, needed space to process what I had just confirmed. I sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on my knees, and stared at the floor like it held some kind of answer. What do you do when the person you've known your whole life turns out to be a stranger wearing your sister's face? I didn't want revenge. That wasn't the plan. When I started collecting these pieces, it wasn't because I wanted to hurt her. It was because I wanted to protect myself. But this felt different. This felt like standing on the edge of a decision that would either keep our family intact in its illusion or shatter it for good. Was it cruel to show the truth when the lie had kept people warm? Downstairs, I heard faint laughter, that brittle, surface-level kind people do when they don't want to admit they're uncomfortable. Probably Mom trying to fill the silence. Probably Rachel cracking jokes again, wiping away guilt with charm. I clenched my fists and stood up. Because I knew one thing now that I hadn't known before. She wasn't going to stop. And if no one else was going to hold her accountable, I would. The truth wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone she'd deceived. Everyone she'd manipulated. Everyone she'd hurt. The only question was whether I'd do it quietly or if I'd make sure she remembered the sound it made when everything fell apart. The weight of truth doesn't hit like a hammer. It sinks like an anchor, slow and deep, pulling everything beneath the surface. When I walked back downstairs, the house was still filled with that specific kind of warmth that only comes when the wine has been flowing longer than the conversation, when everyone's just tipsy enough to laugh at things that aren't funny and ignore things that should be noticed. Laughter bounced off the walls like clumsy echoes, and the smell of burnt pie crust lingered in the air, masked by cinnamon candles trying too hard to be festive. Rachel was sitting at the head of the table again, back in her throne, her red-stained hands fluttering as she told some animated story that had everyone chuckling with that glazed-over look of people who'd rather laugh than ask questions. My mother sat beside her, tight smile intact, sipping decaf and nodding politely, like a woman who had built her life on silence and small talk. Tom was leaning back in his chair with the satisfied slouch of a man who thought the worst part of the evening was already over. Beth glanced up when I entered, and her eyes, sharp, dark, knowing, locked with mine for half a second. She saw it. Whatever was in my face, she saw it. I stepped into the room with the kind of deliberate calm that makes people pause even if they don't know why. I didn't raise my voice or clear my throat. I just picked up a fresh glass from the sideboard, filled it with water from the pitcher, and raised it slowly. The clinking of utensils paused. Heads turned slightly, attention shifted. There's something about a toast that quiets a room, even when the person giving it isn't the usual speaker. Maybe especially then. To honesty, I said, holding the glass just high enough. My voice didn't tremble. It didn't need to. And to backups. A few people chuckled, not really getting the joke, but sensing the cue. Rachel smirked, her eyes flashing just a bit, like she thought I was about to roast myself for being dramatic. That smirk didn't last long. I tapped a button on my phone and heard the quietest sound in the world, the soft, cascading buzz of notifications pinging across the room. One by one, the phones lit up. Some in laps. Some face down on the table. Some in pockets that vibrated against thighs suddenly stiff with confusion. The silence that followed wasn't dramatic or theatrical. It was surgical. Sharp and slicing, like a breath caught halfway through a laugh. Rachel reached for her phone, casual at first, but her fingers hesitated before unlocking the screen. I watched her pupils dilate when she saw the folder name, Thanksgiving Truth. Her thumb hovered. Then she opened it. And froze. Across the table, Diane's hand jerked at the fork she was lifting, dropping it onto her plate with a clatter. Her phone was in her lap, eyes wide and scanning. Tom, slower than the rest, looked between them and finally muttered, "What the hell is this?" No one answered him. The silence stretched like rubber pulled too far. Rachel's face drained of color in a way I'd never seen before, not in arguments, not in tantrums, not in her dramatic flops at family parties when someone else got more attention than she did. This wasn't embarrassment. This was something else. This was recognition. The knowledge that the game was over. That the house of cards she'd built with lies and manipulation and half-truths had just come crashing down in real time, and she hadn't even seen the wind coming. She looked up at me like she wanted to speak, but no sound came out. Her mouth opened once, then shut. She glanced at Mom, who was staring at her phone with a look I hadn't seen since my father's funeral. Not shock, not pain, but a kind of internal rupture, like something had been dislodged so violently it could never go back to where it was. Beth stood slowly, pushing her chair back with a faint scrape. She didn't say a word either. Just nodded at me, once, like a silent thank you or maybe a warning. Then she walked toward the kitchen, her footsteps quiet but purposeful, leaving behind a vacuum no one rushed to fill. Rachel's voice finally broke the silence, barely audible. "What did you do?" I didn't blink. "I didn't do anything, Rachel. I just shared some old files. Thought it was time we all had the same information." Tom picked up his phone and began scrolling, his brow furrowing deeper with every swipe. "Jesus," he muttered. "Is this real?" His voice wasn't angry yet. Just lost, disoriented. Like he'd been told the sky wasn't blue. Rachel's head snapped toward me, and for a moment, I thought she might finally say something that resembled truth. An apology, a plea, even a defense. But instead, she shook her head and let out a bitter laugh. "This is low, Eric. Even for you. Even for me." That was rich coming from the woman who used her own daughter to cover up an affair with our mother's boyfriend. But I didn't say that out loud. I didn't need to. The room already knew. The phones had spoken louder than I ever could. Diane stood up slowly, hands trembling, her cup forgotten on the table. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. "Rachel," she said, and that was all. Just her name, like the weight of it was enough to carry everything else she couldn't say. No one moved after that. No one knew what to do. Thanksgiving was still technically happening, dessert hadn't been served, coffee still steamed in the pot, but the air had shifted. The feast had turned sour. The stories had stopped mid-sentence. And Rachel, for once in her life, had nothing clever left to say. I didn't stay to watch the rest. I turned, walked away, phone still in hand, and left them to sit in the wreckage. Some truths are too heavy to carry alone. And some? Some you hand out like invitations to a funeral nobody realized they were attending. The thing about a toast is this: once the glasses are raised and the words are said, there's no pulling them back. You drink or you don't. But the silence that follows? That's where the truth lives. And in that silence, I finally felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not vindication. Not satisfaction. Just clarity. Cold, sharp, and irreversible. And Rachel? She still didn't apologize. Not even once. The morning after always feels different, even when nothing visible has changed. The same walls, the same furniture, the same birds outside the window pretending they didn't hear the house crack open the night before. The light that streamed through the blinds felt sharper than usual, like the sun knew what I'd done and wanted to shine a little harder just to see what was left. The house was too quiet, not peaceful quiet, but that heavy, loaded silence that comes after a fight when no one wants to be the first to speak because words suddenly cost more than they used to. I sat in the old kitchen chair by the back window, sipping coffee that tasted like burnt memory and listening to the faint creak of floorboards upstairs. Footsteps that could have been Rachel's or Diane's, or maybe just the house shifting under the weight of everything it had just learned. My phone buzzed 3 times in a row, 2 messages, 1 missed call, all from Rachel, all left unanswered. I didn't open them. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The door creaked open and Beth stepped in, still in her hoodie from the night before, her hair a mess of tangled sleep and stubbornness, her face unreadable. She didn't speak right away, just poured herself a mug, leaned against the counter, and stared out the window like she was watching for a sign of something. Maybe forgiveness, maybe fallout, maybe just someone to finally say what needed saying. "You broke the whole damn thing," she said, without turning her head. Not angry, not sad, just a simple observation dropped like a pebble into the stillness. "I didn't break it," I replied after a long pause, swirling the dregs in my mug like they held something more important than they did. "I just stopped pretending it wasn't already broken." She finally looked at me, and there it was, not judgment, but a kind of complicated respect that stings more than any scolding. "I'm proud of you," she said, and that should have felt like a win. But then she added, quieter, slower, "But are you okay being the villain?" That question hit harder than any reaction from the night before. Not because I didn't expect it, but because it's the question I'd been avoiding ever since I clicked share on that folder. Was I okay being the bad guy in a story where everyone else got to keep their hands clean? Was I okay knowing that some people, even people I love, would never look at me the same again? "I don't know," I said, and I meant it. Upstairs, I heard another door open, followed by the unmistakable shuffle of slippers and the uneven rhythm of Diane's walk. A minute later, she appeared in the hallway, robe clutched tightly around her, face carefully composed in that practiced way she'd used since we were kids, the expression of someone who believed if she could just stay calm enough, the storm would pass without touching her. Her eyes met mine, then slid quickly away. She didn't speak. She went straight to the kettle, made tea like her world hadn't been peeled open 12 hours earlier, and when she finally did talk, it was with that same infuriating softness that always seemed to deflect everything. "I think we should all move on," she said, like we were discussing a power outage or a bad batch of stuffing. "There's no point tearing each other apart over things that can't be changed." I didn't respond. Not with words. I just looked at her long enough for the silence to become its own answer. She didn't want to fix anything, she wanted to erase it. And Rachel had learned that same trick a long time ago, inherited it like a family heirloom passed down through quiet dinners and carefully ignored truths. It wasn't denial, not exactly. It was survival dressed up in politeness, a refusal to acknowledge that some wounds don't heal just because you stop looking at them. Rachel finally showed up around noon, sunglasses on indoors, makeup done with the precision of someone preparing for trial. She walked in like nothing had happened, or like everything had happened to someone else, and immediately launched into her performance. "That was incredibly cruel, Eric," she said, not even waiting for a hello. "You ambushed me in front of my daughter, in front of Mom, like some sick courtroom drama. You humiliated me." I didn't flinch. I just kept stirring sugar into my coffee I wasn't going to drink. "You don't care about the truth," she continued, her voice louder now, sharp and brittle. "You wanted to punish me. Admit it." Still, I said nothing. "You're not some hero," she added, stepping closer now, voice lowering into something more venomous. "You're just bitter, and pathetic, and alone." That last word hung in the air longer than the rest. She wanted a reaction. A yell. A fight. Anything that would let her claim the moral high ground she'd already lost. But I gave her nothing, because silence, when wielded correctly, is the sharpest weapon we have. She stood there for a moment, waiting. And when she got no response, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the kitchen, the echo of her footsteps louder than her accusations. Beth looked at me again, and this time, she didn't smile. So now what? That was the real question, wasn't it? Now what? The bomb had gone off. The pieces were scattered. The truth was out there, ugly and irreversible. But what comes after truth? Does it fix things? Or just expose the cracks that were already there? "I don't know," I said again, voice softer this time. "Maybe nothing. Maybe that's the point." Later that day, the family group chat lit up with forced messages. Photos of leftovers. A comment from Tom about how maybe next year we should eat out. Diane posted a blurry shot of the pie with a caption that read, "Still thankful." Rachel said nothing. She didn't leave the chat. She didn't apologize. She just stayed there, silent and unread, her name a reminder that some people would rather live in the ashes than admit they lit the match. And me? I went home. I sat in my apartment, opened my laptop, and stared at the folder still sitting on my desktop. The truth was there. But the fallout? That was mine to live with now. Not every fire burns bright. Some just smolder, slow and deep, for years. And silence. Silence is where the smoke begins. The coffee had gone cold before I even realized I was still holding the mug, fingers wrapped around ceramic like it could somehow anchor me to something solid, something certain. A week had passed since the dinner, though it felt longer, like time had stretched in both directions and collapsed in on itself, leaving me in this quiet apartment that echoed with more memory than sound. The Sunday after Thanksgiving was always the loneliest day of the year for me anyway, but this time it didn't just feel empty, it felt scorched, like something had burned away that wasn't coming back. The family group chat had gone completely silent, not even the usual chain messages from Diane about leftovers or early Christmas planning. The last message was still there, untouched since the night I pressed send. A single shared file link and then nothing. Not a comment. Not a question. Not even a passive-aggressive thumbs up. It was like I'd set off a flare in a desert, and the only response had been dust. Rachel had blocked me the same night. I didn't even get a final word, no scathing rebuttal or a late-night voicemail laced with sarcasm and venom. Just digital absence. She vanished from my feeds, my messages, my phone like she'd never been there at all. Which would have hurt more if I hadn't known, deep down, that our entire relationship had been held together by the same glue she used on everything, denial and deflection. Once the illusion cracked, there was no scaffolding left. Just rubble. Diane hadn't called either. I wasn't sure if she was waiting for me to apologize or hoping if she waited long enough, the whole thing would fade into a memory she could frame as a family rough patch. That had always been her gift, turning reality into a photo album no one was allowed to open. Maybe she didn't want to know what else I had saved. Maybe she didn't want to confront the version of her daughter that lived in those files. Or maybe, and this was the one I hated the most, maybe she'd already forgiven Rachel and simply didn't have enough left over for me. Beth, at least, had reached out. Her message came late at night, hours after I'd given up on sleep and started rereading old emails like they were scripture. She kept it short, the way she always does when she knows I'm not ready to talk. I still think you did the right thing, she wrote. But right doesn't always feel good, huh? I stared at that message longer than I should have, thumb hovering over the screen, thinking about how strange it was to be the parent and still feel like the one learning from the kid. I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't agree, but because I didn't know how to explain the kind of right that feels like loss. The apartment was quiet in that late afternoon way that makes you notice things you usually ignore. The slight rattle in the radiator, the hum of the fridge, the faint city noise seeping through the windows like distant thunder. I opened my laptop, not for work or distraction, but because I needed to see it. I needed to look at the folder that had become the line in the sand. It was still there on the desktop, sitting like an unopened letter from a past version of myself. The original folder, the one I had shared, was now archived, zipped, and locked away. I didn't need to look at it again. I already knew what was in it, but next to it was a new one, labeled simply, "Next time." It wasn't a threat, not even a promise. It was a record of understanding that this wouldn't be the last time someone tried to rewrite the truth with a smile and a shrug. That silence, once broken, has a way of echoing through the years, bouncing off every lie that used to pass as family tradition. I hadn't created the folder out of spite or even anticipation. I created it because people like Rachel don't disappear. They adapt. They find new stories, new targets, new ways to be the hero in rooms full of people they've hurt. And sometimes, the only defense you have is the ability to remember. That's what the folder was. Memory, sharpened. Just in case. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the rain start tapping against the window pane, soft and steady like someone knocking from the other side of something I didn't know how to open. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel at peace. I felt like a man who had walked away from a house fire he didn't start, smelling of smoke and holding the only photographs that didn't burn. Was that justice? I wasn't sure. Was it revenge? Maybe a little. But it was also survival. And sometimes, those things are impossible to separate. I thought about Rachel, wherever she was, probably telling a version of the story where I was the villain and she was the misunderstood sister targeted by the jealous brother who never moved on. I didn't expect her to own it. I didn't even expect her to feel it. She'd always been the type to call fire a warm breeze and then blame you for getting burned. But deep down, I knew she'd never forget the moment the truth caught up with her, not because of what I said, but because of what I didn't say. Because silence, when used right, stays louder than any scream. I saved the folder, closed the laptop, and sat still for a while, watching the city grow dim outside my window. Streetlights flickered on like they were rehearsing for something, and somewhere beneath all that noise, I could still hear her voice from that night, dismissive and hollow. It's just stuff, Eric. Get over it. Turns out, it wasn't just stuff. It was the only truth anyone in that house ever told. And it was mine,